Bruce Lee's roundhouse kick stopped 3 inches from the student's temple, and that was when the boy's knees buckled and he collapsed face first onto the hardwood floor without a sound. Wait, because what Bruce does in the next 4 seconds, before a single person in that packed dojo can even stand up, will become the moment everyone talks about for years. The dojo was full that Saturday morning. 16 students knelt along the mirrored wall in 2 neat rows, their white uniforms crisp, their breathing synchronized from the warm-up drills Bruce had just finished leading. The boy who fell was named David Chen, 17 years old, a junior who had trained at the school for almost 2 years. He wasn't the strongest student, he wasn't the fastest, but he showed up 3 times a week without fail, and Bruce respected that more than natural talent. The Oakland sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the polished wood floor. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? David had volunteered for the demonstration. Bruce asked for someone to receive a controlled technique sequence, a roundhouse aimed at the temple, pulled short, followed by a sweep and a light chest push to simulate a takedown. It was choreography, not combat. David stepped forward before anyone else could raise a hand. Bruce nodded once, appreciating the courage, and told him to stand ready. The other students leaned forward slightly in their kneeling positions, eager to watch their teacher in motion. The first kick came fast but precise. Bruce's heel arced toward the boy's head and froze in the air, close enough that David could feel the displaced wind against his ear. That was the moment David's face changed. His eyes went somewhere else, somewhere far away from the dojo and the mirrors and the watching students. His knees folded inward like a marionette whose strings had been cut. And then he dropped straight down, his cheek hitting the wooden floor with a dull, sickening thump that echoed in the sudden silence. Nobody moved. Notice that detail, because what happens in silence often matters more than what happens in noise. 16 students knelt frozen in place. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound nobody had noticed until all other sounds disappeared. Somewhere outside, a car horn honked on the Oakland street, completely unaware that inside this converted warehouse, a boy had just stopped responding to the world. A thin line of saliva ran from the corner of David's mouth onto the polished wood. Bruce didn't freeze. His body was already moving before his conscious mind caught up. He dropped to one knee beside David, his hand reaching for the boy's shoulder, rolling him gently onto his side, with the kind of controlled urgency that only years of training can produce. David's eyes were open but empty, staring at nothing, his chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths that made everyone who was watching want to look away but couldn't. "Nobody touch him," Bruce said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it that made everyone sit straighter. "Michael, call for an ambulance. Tell them a student lost consciousness during training. Give them this address. Go now." Michael Reyes, a 23-year-old brown belt who worked as a delivery driver during the week, scrambled to his feet and ran toward the small office at the back of the dojo where the telephone sat on a cluttered desk. His bare feet slapped against the floor, the only sound in a room that had gone completely still. The slapping sound seemed impossibly loud. Bruce stayed beside David. He didn't shake him. He didn't slap his face. He didn't try to force him awake. Instead, he placed 2 fingers against the boy's neck, feeling for a pulse, and watched the rise and fall of his chest with absolute concentration. The pulse was there, fast, thready, but present. "David," Bruce said quietly, leaning close to the boy's ear. "David, can you hear me? You're safe. You're in the dojo. I need you to try to move your fingers if you can hear my voice." Nothing. The boy's fingers stayed limp against the hardwood. His eyes blinked once, twice, but there was no recognition in them. Listen carefully to what Bruce does next, because this is where most teachers would have panicked, and panic is exactly what Bruce refused to allow himself. He looked up at the rows of students watching him. Their faces were pale. One girl in the back row had tears running silently down her cheeks. A heavy-set man near the front kept opening and closing his fists, like he wanted to do something but didn't know what. "Everyone stay where you are," Bruce said. "Breathe. Control your breathing. David is alive. His heart is beating. The ambulance is coming. What he needs from us right now is calm, not fear. Do you understand?" A few nods. A few murmured responses. But Bruce saw the doubt in their eyes, and he knew exactly what they were thinking. They were thinking that maybe the kick had connected. Maybe Bruce's control hadn't been as perfect as he claimed. Stop for a second and picture the whole dojo from above, because who stood where will matter more than you think. Bruce kneeling beside David, Michael in the back office with the phone pressed to his ear, 16 students in 2 rows along the mirror, their reflections doubling their worried faces, and in the back row, a young man named Tommy Lou watching with narrowed eyes. Here's something you need to understand about Bruce Lee in this moment. He wasn't just worried about David, he was worried about every single person in that room. Because he knew that what they witnessed in the next 10 minutes would shape how they thought about martial arts, about training, about him, for the rest of their lives. If he lost control now, if he showed fear, if he made excuses, he would lose something far more valuable than his reputation. The ambulance arrived in 11 minutes. 2 paramedics came through the front door with a stretcher and a medical bag, their movements efficient and practiced. Bruce stepped back to give them room to work. He answered their questions clearly. The boy was 17. No known medical conditions that Bruce was aware of. He had collapsed suddenly during a demonstration. There was no impact. The technique was pulled short. The boy fell on his own. One of the paramedics, a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and a no-nonsense expression, looked at Bruce for a long moment before she nodded. "We'll take him to Highland Hospital. Someone should call his parents." "I'll do it," Bruce said immediately. "I have their number in the office." Stop here for a moment and consider what Bruce just committed to. He could have delegated that call to someone else. He could have let the hospital handle the notification, but he chose to be the one who told David's parents that their son was on his way to the emergency room. He chose to be the voice they heard. That choice tells you everything about the kind of man Bruce Lee was trying to be. The paramedics loaded David onto the stretcher. His eyes were fully open now, and he was mumbling something that sounded like sorry over and over again, though his voice was too weak to be sure. Bruce put a hand on the boy's arm as they wheeled him toward the door. "Nothing to be sorry for," Bruce said. "You rest. I'll see you at the hospital." The door closed behind the stretcher, and suddenly the dojo felt enormous and empty. Despite the 16 students still kneeling along the wall, the fluorescent lights hummed. The mirrors reflected pale, worried faces, and Bruce stood in the center of the room, barefoot on the hardwood where a boy had fallen, and realized that his work for the day was just beginning. He walked to the office and picked up the phone. The receiver felt heavier than it should have. He dialed the number from David's student file and waited through 3 rings before a woman's voice answered. "Mrs. Chen, this is Bruce Lee. I'm calling from the martial arts school. I need to tell you something about David, and I need you to stay calm while I explain." Notice the way Bruce framed that sentence. He didn't start with "there's been an accident" or "something happened to your son." He started with his name, established the context, and asked her to stay calm before delivering the news. It was a small thing, but it was the difference between a phone call that created panic and a phone call that created trust. He told her what happened. He told her which hospital. He told her he would meet her there. And when she started crying, when her voice broke into the kind of sound that only a terrified mother can make, he stayed on the line and repeated the important facts until he was sure she had absorbed them. By the time he hung up, his hand was shaking. Remember that detail. Bruce Lee's hand was shaking, and he didn't try to hide it from himself. He stood alone in that small office with its cluttered desk and its filing cabinet and its single window looking out at the gray Oakland sky, and he let himself feel the fear that he had refused to show his students. Then he took 3 deep breaths, rolled his shoulders, and walked back out into the dojo. The students were still kneeling, and that was when Tommy Lou stood up. "Sifu," Tommy said. The word hung in the air. It was the formal term of respect, but something about the way Tommy said it sounded more like a challenge than an honorific. Bruce turned to face him. "Yes, Tommy, I saw your foot connect." Just for a second, right before David went down, the room went completely silent. Wait, because what happens in the next 60 seconds will determine whether this situation becomes a crisis of faith or a lesson in leadership. Bruce didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't immediately contradict Tommy. Instead, he walked 3 steps closer to the young man and looked him directly in the eyes. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Tommy swallowed. He clearly hadn't expected Bruce to respond with curiosity instead of denial. "I was watching from the back row. Your kick came around, and I thought I saw your heel tap his temple. Just a tap, light, but then he fell." Bruce nodded slowly. "Which side of my foot did you see make contact? The heel or the ball?" "The heel, I think." "And where exactly on his temple? Above the ear? Behind it? At the hairline?" Tommy hesitated. "I don't know. It happened fast." "It did happen fast," Bruce agreed. "Very fast. And from where you were sitting, 8 feet away, at an angle, with other students between us, what you saw was a kick moving toward a head and then a body falling. Your brain filled in the connection, because that's what brains do. They create stories to explain what they witness." Tommy's face reddened further. "So you're saying I'm wrong?" "I'm saying I don't know if you're wrong. And neither do you. Not for certain." Bruce's voice was gentle, almost kind. "Here's what I know for certain. I felt no impact. My heel passed through air, not bone. My muscle memory tells me the kick was controlled, but I'm also not arrogant enough to claim my perception is perfect. So let's do something together." He gestured toward the center of the room. "Come stand where David stood. I'll perform the same kick, at the same speed, and you tell me what you feel." The other students had stopped moving toward the door. They were watching now, drawn back into the scene by something they hadn't expected. Their teacher offering to be tested. Tommy walked to the center of the room and stood where David had stood. His jaw was tight. His hands were balled into fists at his sides. He was nervous, and he was trying not to show it. The mirrors reflected the confrontation from multiple angles. Bruce took his position. "Ready?" Tommy nodded. The kick came, fast, fluid, a roundhouse that arced through the air with the kind of precision that only years of practice can produce. Tommy felt the wind against his ear. He felt the displacement of air as the heel passed within inches of his temple. But he didn't feel impact. He didn't feel contact. Bruce lowered his leg and waited. Tommy stood very still for a long moment. Then he exhaled, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. I didn't feel anything. Now I want you to remember this feeling," Bruce said. "The feeling of being certain about something, and then discovering that your certainty was based on incomplete information. That feeling is humility, and it's what separates a student who grows from a student who stays stuck." Notice what Bruce just did. He didn't humiliate Tommy. He didn't make him look foolish in front of the class. Instead, he turned the confrontation into a lesson, and he did it in a way that let Tommy save face, while still acknowledging that his accusation had been mistaken. Tommy bowed. It was a real bow this time, not a formality. I'm sorry, Sifu. I shouldn't have said anything without being sure. You should always say what you see, Bruce replied. Just be willing to test it. That's all I ask. The students filed out slowly after that, some of them stopping to bow to Bruce individually, others glancing back over their shoulders. Within 10 minutes, the dojo was empty, except for Bruce and the echo of what had just happened. He stood alone in the center of the room, looking down at the spot where David had fallen. The wet mark was drying now, fading into the wood grain, but Bruce could still see it if he looked closely enough. He changed clothes in the small bathroom adjacent to the office, pulling on slacks and a simple button-down shirt. He grabbed his keys from the desk drawer and locked the front door of the dojo behind him. The drive to Highland Hospital took 17 minutes. The parking lot was crowded with Saturday traffic, families coming and going, a man in a wheelchair being pushed toward the entrance by a woman who might have been his daughter. Bruce found a space near the back and walked through the automatic doors into the emergency room waiting area. David's parents were already there. His mother spotted Bruce the moment he walked in. She stood up from her plastic chair and took 3 quick steps toward him. And for a moment Bruce thought she was going to hit him. Instead, she grabbed his hands. "Mr. Lee, thank you for calling. Thank you for coming." Bruce was caught off guard by the gratitude. He had expected anger, or at least fear masked as politeness. But Mrs. Chen was looking at him like he was an ally, not an adversary. "How is he?" Bruce asked. "They're running tests. They won't tell us anything yet. My husband is back there with him." She gestured toward the doors that led to the examination rooms. "They only let one of us go at a time." Bruce guided her back to her chair and sat down beside her. "Tell me about David. Has anything like this ever happened before?" Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Never. He's healthy. He's always been healthy. He doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, doesn't stay up too late. He's a good boy. He's a very good student," Bruce said. "Dedicated, disciplined. He never misses class. He loves your school. He talks about it all the time, about the philosophy, about the techniques, about you." She looked at Bruce with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "He wants to be like you." Wait, because what Mrs. Chen says next will change how Bruce thinks about this entire situation. "He's been pushing himself," she continued. "Harder than he should, I think. He wants to be ready for the tournament next month, the one in San Francisco. He's been training at home too, running in the mornings, practicing kicks in the backyard. I told him to slow down, but he said, 'You always tell your students that pain is just weakness leaving the body.'" Bruce went very still. He had said those words. He had said them many times, in many classes, as a way of encouraging students to push through discomfort and reach new levels of capability. But hearing them now, filtered through a mother's fear and a boy's collapsed body, they sounded different. They sounded dangerous. "Mrs. Chen," Bruce said carefully, "I do say that. But I also teach students to know the difference between productive discomfort and genuine distress. Has David been sleeping enough? Eating properly? Taking rest days?" She hesitated. "I don't know. He doesn't tell me everything. He's 17. He thinks he knows better than his mother." A picture was forming in Bruce's mind, and it wasn't a picture he liked. A dedicated student, eager to impress, pushing himself beyond his limits in pursuit of a goal that was still weeks away, overtraining, under-recovery, the kind of accumulated fatigue that could make a body betray itself at the worst possible moment. If that was what happened, if David's collapse was caused by exhaustion rather than impact, then Bruce's kick was irrelevant. But that didn't mean Bruce was innocent, because the philosophy that drove David to overtrain had come from Bruce's mouth. Notice this moment carefully, because it's the moment when Bruce Lee stopped thinking about whether he had made a physical mistake and started thinking about whether he had made a philosophical one. An hour passed. Then another. Bruce stayed in the waiting room with Mrs. Chen, talking quietly about nothing important, keeping her company while the fluorescent lights hummed, and the television in the corner played a game show with the sound turned off. Finally, Mr. Chen emerged from the examination area, a tired-looking man in his 50s with work-worn hands. "He's awake?" Mr. Chen said. "He's talking. The doctors think it was exhaustion. Dehydration, maybe? They're keeping him overnight to run more tests. But they don't think it's serious." Mrs. Chen burst into tears and threw her arms around her husband. Bruce stood apart, watching them hold each other, feeling like an intruder on their relief. Mr. Chen looked at Bruce over his wife's shoulder. "He wants to see you. Room 114. The doctor said it's okay." Bruce walked through the doors that led to the examination rooms, following the numbered signs until he found 114. The door was open. Inside, David Chen lay in a hospital bed that seemed too large for his thin frame. An IV line running into his arm, monitors beeping softly beside him. His eyes were open. When he saw Bruce, he tried to sit up, then winced and settled back against the pillows. "Sifu," he said. His voice was hoarse but clear. "I'm sorry." Bruce pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "What are you sorry for?" "For embarrassing you, in front of everyone. For falling like that. I ruined the demonstration. Listen to what this boy is saying. He nearly collapsed from exhaustion. He scared his parents half to death. He's lying in a hospital bed with needles in his arm, and his first concern is that he embarrassed his teacher." Bruce reached out and put a hand on David's shoulder. "You didn't embarrass me. You scared me. There's a difference." David's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to be ready for the tournament. I've been training every day, running 5 miles in the morning, practicing forms at night. I thought if I worked hard enough." "You thought you could outwork your body's need for rest," Bruce finished. "You thought that discipline meant ignoring pain instead of listening to it." David nodded miserably. "That's my fault," Bruce said. The words came out harder than he intended, and he saw David flinch. He softened his voice. "Not entirely my fault, but partly. I taught you that pain is weakness leaving the body. I didn't teach you well enough that rest is strength entering it. I emphasized the push without emphasizing the recovery, and you took my words and used them to hurt yourself." David was crying now, silent tears running down his cheeks and soaking into the hospital pillow. Bruce let him cry. Some emotions needed to come out before words could go in. After a few minutes, David wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked at Bruce again. "Am I still your student?" The question hit Bruce harder than he expected. "Is that what you're worried about? That I'm going to kick you out for collapsing?" "I don't know. I thought maybe you'd think I was weak, that I couldn't handle the training." Bruce leaned forward in his chair. "Listen to me very carefully, David. You are not weak. You pushed yourself too hard because you wanted something badly, and you didn't know when to stop. That's not weakness. It's inexperience. And the only way to cure inexperience is to keep learning. So yes, you are still my student. But when you come back to the dojo, and you will come back after the doctors clear you, we're going to have a long conversation about recovery." David nodded. For the first time since Bruce walked into the room, something like hope appeared in the boy's eyes. "There's something else," Bruce said. "The tournament next month. You're not competing." The hope flickered. "But Sifu, no arguments. Your body needs time to recover, and your mind needs time to rebuild its relationship with your body. There will be other tournaments. This one isn't worth risking your health." David looked down at the IV in his arm, at the monitors tracking his vital signs. When he looked up again, his expression was different, calmer, more accepting. "Okay," he said quietly. "I understand." Bruce stayed with David for another 20 minutes, talking about small things, a movie David wanted to see, a book Bruce was reading. Then he said goodbye to the family and drove home. That night, Alone in his apartment, Bruce sat at his desk with a notebook open in front of him. The desk lamp cast a circle of warm light over the blank page. He picked up a pen and began to write. He wrote about balance, about the relationship between effort and recovery, about the danger of teaching principles without teaching their limitations. He wrote about David Chen and the wet spot on the dojo floor and the sound of a body hitting hardwood. And then at the bottom of the page, he wrote 3 sentences. Pain is information, not an enemy. Listen to it before you try to defeat it. The strongest warrior is the one who knows when to rest. He closed the notebook and sat back in his chair. If you've stayed with this story until now, there's something I want you to think about. Every teacher carries a responsibility that goes beyond the words they say. Their students don't just learn the intended lessons. They learn the assumptions, the blind spots, the gaps between philosophy and practice. Bruce Lee nearly lost a student that Saturday morning, not because of a kick that didn't connect, but because of a philosophy that was incomplete. And the measure of who he was, the real measure, not the legend, was what he did after he recognized the gap. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame David for being too eager. He looked at himself first, and then he changed. The following Monday, Bruce stood in his dojo and addressed his students. Before we begin, I want to talk about Saturday. David collapsed during a demonstration. He's recovering well, but his collapse taught me something. The students listened. I've been teaching you to push through pain. That's true sometimes, but your body talks to you. Pain is information. The difference between productive discomfort and genuine distress is one of the most important lessons you will ever learn. He paused. From now on, every intense session will be followed by recovery. Every week will include rest. If you feel like you're pushing too hard, tell me. I won't think you're weak. I'll think you're wise. He bowed. The students bowed back, and then Bruce Lee finally smiled. All right, let's train. If you want to hear about another moment when Bruce Lee faced a test he didn't expect, a night when a challenger showed up at his door with a reputation that made even the senior students nervous, tell me in the comments. And while you're there, let me know what's the most important lesson you've ever learned the hard way. Some lessons can only be understood after they've cost you something. The question is whether you let the cost break you or let it teach you. Bruce Lee chose to let it teach him. So did David Chen. And somewhere in Oakland, in a dojo with mirrored walls and polished floors, the teaching continues. Every Saturday, every Monday, every moment, when a student steps onto the mat and a teacher steps forward to meet them. That's the legacy that matters. Not the kicks, not the speed, not the legend. The willingness to keep learning, the courage to admit when you're wrong, and the discipline to keep going.